Hey everyone, welcome to Heroic Studios Gaming's Patreon channel, to the Heroic Studios Gaming Book Corner for June 2021. Oh man, we're in 2021. Oh yeah, it's been a crazy time. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about the Judge Dredd comic books, because I promised that in my my update earlier this last week here. So let's talk about that. So the Judge Dredd comic books, if you guys don't know, if you have lived under a rock and have no idea what Judge Dredd is, then I feel for you. Like, I feel really bad for you if that's the case. But basically, Judge Dredd is a comic book series it's a British comic book series. It was published originally in like 1977. Let me look at my notes real fast on my other screen. Where was the note? 1977, I was right. It was published in 1977, and it was made as part of an anthology series of comics called the 2000 AD. The idea behind 2000 AD was supposed to be these sort of spy-like, things. It was supposed to be like in the year 2000, which, makes sense. Made by the guys, made by the guys, the guys who were making it anyway. It was supposed to be like they were trying to make this sort of anthology series that had these different stories. And if you don't know, like, British comic books are different from American comic books. Like, in American comic books, we have monthly issues that come out, right? And they're this like 20-ish page, the soft cover thing, a 30-page soft cover thing that like are parts of a story, and then like you'll have a story arc that's like multiple issues, and then like that'll be a story arc. Well, in England, the way that they do comics, or the way that they did comics, I think they've come more toward the American style over time. But the way they used to do comics was more like a weekly publication, and it was much like, like we have weekly publications in like the Sunday newspaper and stuff like that. This is about the same thing. They used to have these sort of continuous stories. They would publish an anthology, a series of stories in a book, and they would get them out on the stands out on the streets every week, and that's how these guys paid their bills, right? And so they would sort of create these things, and they would put them in this book, and then they would slap them together. And so you'd have to buy, we have in America, the American system, we get like one issue every month, and it's like 30 pages. Well, the way they would do it is they would have like 4 pages or 5 pages in each anthology that came out weekly. And so if you wanted to get a full, like, at the end of the month, you got roughly the same amount of comic book of like one story, but you would get multiple stories. You'd have like 6 or 7 different stories in one of these anthology books that are coming out weekly, or even more. And then you would read these stories, and you have to buy, like, every week you'd have to go buy more to find out what happens next. But you get like 4 pages of it, so you get a few panels. Like there'd be like 6 panels a page or whatever, and you get 4 pages of it, so you get like 20 panels. So you'd make it like a quarter of the way through the book, and then it would be like, to be continued, right? And they would just continue doing that. Much like they do with comic books, but it would come out weekly. But they would be much shorter. They would be these truncated things, and there'd be other stories along with them. So basically, the guys would essentially create stuff and determine whether or not people liked it. It would be like people bought the issues, and then they would have to, like, they'd fill out surveys. So they had like a lot of feedback, a lot of back and forth. Like the fans had, or the readers anyway, did dictate like sort of what stayed and what went. Like if people just didn't care about certain stories, then they would just cut them, and they would just pull them out, and they'd put other things in. So Judge Dredd was developed as one of these things. It was supposed to originally be a story that was made that followed like a Dirty Harry, right? It was kind of like a Dirty Harry thing, because they had written, the creators of it were the creator. It was, I listened to his autobiography on Audible. What was his name? Pat Mills and John Wagner were the two creators of the Judge Dredd comic series, and they were working on this 2000 AD, and they had originally created another comic series that was about a cop. It was basically Dirty Harry in comic book form, but it kind of wasn't popular, and so they decided that they were going to try to re-envision it. It kind of existed. I'm not saying it's not popular. Like, British people might be arguing with me, because I guess it did have some following, and it did kind of peter around for a while, for a few years, but this was in like 1975 or something like that. And Dirty Harry, if you guys don't know, came out in 1971, if that gives you any idea. If you've seen Dirty Harry, you would not realize that it came out in 1971. You'd get the feeling that it came out like in the 80s. It actually came out in the 70s. So anyway, I mean, it has the 70s feel. Like, the aesthetic is the 70s, but like the quality of the film is like 80s style, but it actually came out in the 70s. So when they created this comic book in 1975. It was like Dirty Harry, and it was kind of okay, and people were kind of following it, but it wasn't quite it wasn't good enough. So they decided that in this 2000s thing, which is supposed to be semi-futuristic, that it would be a little different. And they actually didn't intend for it to be that futuristic. They just intended to be a little futuristic. And like I guess, according to the autobiography from Pat Mills, it kind of went like, he kind of said something like, what if like cops were like what if this was like a fully fascist society and like cops could do whatever they wanted and get away with it? And so that's where the idea of this like Dirty Harry cop, like if Dirty Harry could just do whatever the hell he wanted and his captain wouldn't get angry with him, then like what would that look like? So they created this character called Judge Dredd, which is based off of some musician that they were fans of whose name was Judge Dredd or whatever. But he spelled it differently. He spelled it like, the actual way he spelled Dredd, not Dredd. And so they were like, yeah, what if we like chose his name? And so that was like the idea. So then they went ahead and Pat Mills wrote the story for it. And it was kind of dark. But they hired this movie poster guy to do the art for it. I don't remember his name. I don't think it's tremendously important. Well, it kind of was, but it wasn't actually, because there was a whole thing in the autobiography about how art in the comic book world in England tends to fail to attribute the artist. Like it fails very, like in most cases they fail to like sort of give the attributions to the artist so that other people can find those artists. So essentially if an artist made it into a group or somebody found them, they were essentially like always able to get work because they were the only people though that were trying to pay for them. So they were like, if you got in with one comic book, you wouldn't get into other comic book companies. Like that was sort of the problem, because the comic book companies would just sort of steal your art. They'd pay you whatever they were going to pay you. Hopefully it was the correct amount. Hopefully it was what you contracted to, because when you go to because if you tried to sue or try to prove that it was your art they were using, you couldn't. So anyway, the artist I don't know the name of, or I mean, I think he said it in the autobiography, but I completely forgot. But so they made this art. Well, the artist sort of sketched a much more dark and futuristic landscape. And he also put Judge Dredd all in like black leather, which they had not originally sort of envisioned him to be in black leather with chains. They thought he looked like a pirate when they saw the art, but they had to go with it. They didn't have time. Like this was the thing. They didn't have much of a budget. They didn't have time. They had to use the art that he had made. They couldn't be like, oh, make it again. So they stuck with it. But then the people actually responded to it. In fact, Judge Dredd quickly became, he didn't come out until prog number 2 or 3. I think it was the second one. He wasn't in the first issue of the 2000 AD series. They had other comics in its place, and he wasn't part of that. So he wasn't one of their first launch characters. They had other characters instead. So he showed up in the second issue of their magazine, 2000 AD, that they put on the shelves, and he quickly became a fan favorite. People wanted to read the story about this like Dirty Harry cop in the future who just did like crazy stuff. But like it still wasn't he wasn't in the form that we know him as Dredd. He was still kind of like proto Dredd. And that went on for I think like a year, if I remember the autobiography. It was like a year that he was sort of there, and he was they were just kind of doing random stories, Dirty Harry like stories with this future cop. And then the company they were supposed to get bought out by another comic book, like a bigger comic book company. And it fell apart. Like it didn't go anywhere. So so Pat Mills actually quit. I think it was Mills quit. Yeah, he said he like walked away from it in the autobiography. So he walked away, and they kind of like didn't know what to do, and John Wagner sort of kept it going, and like they had other people sort of freelancers step in and sort of go with it. And Judge Dredd's storylines kind of sucked. Like he stopped being the most popular character, and that meant he was going to get pulled from the 2080 thing, and then. Pat Mills came back, and he was like, okay, you know what, in issue number 9. So I guess he was only out of the game for like a month, right? And then he came back, because like it's a weekly thing. So then he came back and he was like, all right, screw this. And so he stepped in and he started the story arc called The Robot Wars. And this involved, I think the character was called Call Me Kevin, or Kenneth. Yeah, Call Me Kenneth. And it was a story about robots, the mistreated robots of the society that Judge Dredd lived in, and how they were tired of basically being everyone's servants. They were essentially AIs that went rogue, right? And they started making other robots. And the only reason why Judge Dredd was even part of it was because Judge Dredd was actually quite friendly with the vending machine. He wasn't super friendly. He just wasn't mean to the vending machine. that was in his like apartment, because that's the futuristic world. And so he wasn't mean to his vending machine, and so the vending machine helped him beat Call Me Kenneth. And so he wins by killing the robot Kenneth. And that story arc got everyone really super excited because it like defined like the Judge Dredd world that people were reading about. Is not just, or is like a more like a dystopian situation. So it became more like a cyberpunk story, which was again really popular in the late 70s, right? Where it started in the late 70s, like it started in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And so like that was sort of like the thing, and it sort of kicked into motion like the fan base that's sort of following it. And it also solidified this world that like the city that Dredd lived in, and then they could expand on that like world lore. And they were like, okay, well, outside Mega City 1 is actually just a like nuclear wasteland for a bunch of international wars, and it's just a big wasteland of, you know, death, and they call it the Cursed Earth, right? And that was like, people were like, oh my god, and then they're like, yeah, there's mutants out there, and people were like, oh my god, and like it just became popular, and everyone loved it. And since that point, it has been literally in Judge Dredd is in every issue of their comics and has been around since the 1970s. So he didn't die at all. Like the character just kept going. It's a very interesting story. You can download, and you can find and download the case files. They actually have all of the collected case files from like 77 to like 1991 or something, before the American launch of the Judge Dredd single issues that we know, like the styles we have with the monthly issues with, I think it was like Eagle Comics or something before, but and then it went to IDW, and now it's with Rebellion, who owns it both in Britain and in America. But so they published these Judge Dredd comics. So once it came to America like that, then it's harder to find them because they have different like copyright stuff, right? But the British versions up until that point you can get online as like omnibuses, right? You can just buy like a whole slob of them. And so I actually have the digital versions on my Kindle, and I've read through the first like from like 77 to like 80 or something, like 3 years worth of comics. So far, like case files, like a bunch of basically the first trade paperback I've read through. And like Judge Dredd's an interesting character, and it's an interesting world, but only if you recognize that it's supposed to be like a pseudo satirical look at a fascist society. Like, you know, like the people are put in jail for things like chewing gum. Like if you chew gum, you go to jail. If you drink coffee, you go to jail. If you have sugar, you go to jail. Right? Like it's like a thing. Like the best part, like there's like the movie Judge Dredd with Stallone explains this part really well, because there's a thing where there's like this recycled food robot going by, and it's like, you eat recycled food, right? And like the hacker's like trying to not die in a gunfight, and so he's like hacked the robot to escape, and Judge Dredd judges him for hacking a city robot, despite the fact that he was doing it so that he could get out of a gang war essentially and not die. And so that's like this sort of the sort of jokey sort of satirical looks at the way that Judge Dredd works in the comic books. And so like if you recognize that it's like supposed to be a satirical look at a fascist society, and recognize that it's not trying to promote a fascist society, then it's wonderful. If you think that it's like, if you're a person who likes fascism for some reason and you think it's supporting fascism, then you're going to hate Judge Dredd's comics, because there's a lot of like moments where it's very obviously supposed to be satirical. Like they literally call fat people fatties. Like that's what they call them. And they call themselves that. They call themselves fatties. And you know, and it's just like, it's supposed to be sort of a little bit humorous look at this sort of future fascist society. But the world of 2000 AD, like sort of they eventually kind of blended it all together so that like all of the different comics that exist in it all exist in the same world. So, or sort of similar, same world. Like there's some discussion about Rogue Trooper being on like a different planet, but actually it kind of still feels like the Cursed Earth. So like you could easily exist them in the same place. And I loved Rogue Trooper. I found the American comics back in the day when I was a kid, and so I loved that series. And then like Strontium Dogs is about like people who travel like different planets and stuff and are mercenaries, bounty hunters and things. And there are aliens in Judge Dredd. Like the aliens are real. Everyone knows they exist, and like they know that there are aliens and other planets out there. And so Strontium Dogs exists in that same use, humans that have left, or you know, pseudo humans that have left and gone to other planets. So it's a very interesting sort of world of comic books, and it creates a very cool look at the future, because it is both cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic at the same time, because the cursed earth is basically a post-apocalyptic wasteland full of just like dead things and radiation and no food, no water, mutants that are mutant cannibals are trying to eat you all over the place, giant rats, weird monsters. And that's all the cursed earth. And that's right outside of Mega City 1, which is just a giant walled city that is basically like the state of New York and states of New York and New Jersey sort of bound, if they came together, like basically from Delaware to New York City or something like that, is like Wilmington, Delaware. It's like the U.S. Capitol, right? So like Washington, D.C. to New York, that area, if it became one big city. And I think technically they say that it extends all the way out to Georgia, and that's Mega City 1. Like it's a big city that's like multiple states, and like, because I think Peachtrees, which is where they take place of the second Dredd movie, takes place in Peachtrees, is supposed to be in Georgia. And that's in the canon, the way that they do it. But it's just this giant mega city that has like, you know, like really high rise buildings, like towers and stuff, and that are crazy like blocks, like buildings that are whole city blocks that house like 20 to 50,000 people. There's like cars that can fly. There's like, you know, cloning tech because like Judge Dredd is a clone. There's like all kinds of mutations. It's like a crazy cyberpunk city in Mega City 1, and it's always terrible and covered in crime and covered in rain. And this is our Mega City. This is what we expect from a cyberpunkian city. So you have like a post-apocalyptic place on one side and a cyberpunkian city on the other side, and then you've got these judges whose whole job is to keep law and order in this crazy society. And how do they do that? Well, they do whatever they have to keep law and order, right? They keep order going, which means that they have to throw people in the ISO cubes for chewing gum to keep the streets clean, so the streets are not covered in chewing gum that people spit out. Then that's what they're gonna do. So that's the cool thing. So that's basically like the whole world of Judge Dredd, and I honestly would recommend it. I have read, like I said, a number of them. I have not read any of the newer stuff, but I read like quite a bit of it, and I follow like some of their stuff. Like I said, I listened to the audiobook on the creator's autobiography because I was interested to know more about the world of Judge Dredd. I will talk about more because this month is going to be like Judge Dredd. There's going to be talking about the movies a lot more, and I'm going to be talking about the RPG. But so just to let you know, like my normal thing is like I usually end by telling you that it's good or whether I enjoy it. I give it a 2 thumbs up only because I really like the satirical look on the fascist society and like the little jokes that they throw in all over the place. Like seriously, they name whenever they have to name a block, like a big complex, like a big building. They usually name it something ridiculous, and in the early days they were even more ridiculous. Later on, they became a little bit more serious. But they name it something ridiculous, and like the RPG, right, they followed that trend, and they named, like in the pre-made adventure, one of the pre-made adventures that come along with the book, the whole thing takes place in the Matt Damon block, named after the actor Matt Damon, and so they do stuff like that in the comic books to be sort of funny, to have like a little laugh to go along with it. And so like it's pretty good. It's really kind of good, but it is dark. You do have to recognize that like Judge Dredd is kind of a dick. Like he's supposed to be the best representation of a fascist society that exists, and even he sometimes begins to question the laws because they're kind of shitty. So anyway, yeah, that's it for me. I give it 2 thumbs up. If you ever get a chance to pick up some of the old stuff, I don't know about, like I said, I don't know about the new stuff. I can't tell you, but I have seen some of the art from the new stuff, like the stuff from the last 10 years, and it is cool. It is very cool. So I'll still give it 2 thumbs up, but and yeah, and like I didn't discover it when I was a kid, but you know, I didn't discover Judge Dredd anyway, but I did discover Rogue Trooper, which is a shoot-off series from the 2080 group, and it follows a genetically engineered soldier whose whole group of other genetically engineered soldiers were killed by some kind of betrayal, it seems, and then his partners all became like these sort of personality chips that he's implanted in his gear, and so his helmet, his gun, and his backpack are his best friends, and they are legit, like they used to be people, so they have like people personalities, and they have like, you know, foibles and fears and things like you'd expect from people. And so it was actually a great series as a kid to like see that and like think like, what if your helmet could talk to you? What if your gun could do stuff for you because it was sentient, you know? And so that was my introduction to the world of 2080. But That's it. This video has been kind of long, and I've just rambled for most of it, but I hope you liked it. I would look into Judge Dredd if you ever get a chance. I mean, we can watch the movies. That'll be fun. We should do that for movie night. That'll be great. But we won't do it this month because I've already planned the videos for this month. All right. So anyway, I'll see you guys later.